The delegate from the 95th. He is the Vice Chair of Revenue, Chuck Horst. Chuck, good morning. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, Admiral. How are you doing?
What nickname do you have, Chuck?
I don't know if I have a nickname, to be honest with you. Oh, well, maybe.
We'll give you one.
I get called ornery.
Well, I can see that. But we can be a little more descriptive as well, Chuck.
That might be a little frightening. I'm not sure.
Give Rob and I a couple minutes. We'll banter back and forth. But by the time you leave here, you'll have a descriptive name.
I'm afraid you're probably correct.
The honorary Chuck Horst, our guest on the program. Chuck also serves on finance and investments as well. And we asked you last time when you were on, Chuck, but just to revisit, what is the difference between revenue and finance in regards to the committees?
Well, revenue is just going to be dealing with, I guess, revenue coming into the state. Finance is everything as a whole as far as money goes.
Is revenue a subcommittee of finance?
Yes.
All right. So when you go to finance meetings, as the vice chair, do you have to report on revenue at times?
Not during the finance meetings, no. The revenue committee and finance is really totally separate. Of course, anything that we pass in subcommittee, if you want to call it pass, really what we're doing is we're just sending it back up to the standing committee for further consideration.
Do you answer to Vernon Chris, the chairman of finance? Do you have to get approval through him for things that you do on revenue?
I'm not in a position to really say for sure, but I will say that when I was chair of natural resources, that are the minor committees then that were known as minor committees, that your agenda had to be approved by higher up. So whenever you set what your agenda was going to be, higher up looked at it and then they would give a final approval. With that said, when I was chair, I never had anything, was never told no not to run anything.
Gotcha.
So I never received a message like that.
The Speaker instituted a new format this year that emphasized quality over quantity. How did you think that worked out?
I think the process is actually probably pretty good and generally works as was expected, I believe. A little bit cumbersome, especially in the first year, but I think next session will probably be a lot easier as everybody has a better idea how it works. I will say that me personally, there's some bills that I may not introduce again, or I will consider whether I really want to introduce a bill because of the aspect to have to describe the bill to committee and then stand there and answer questions. There's a number of bills that I have submitted in the past that I don't know an awful lot about that subject. However, I was asked to submit the bills. So to actually have to kind of defend the bill like that, not knowing much about it, gets a little bit uncomfortable.
But I think that would be a good thing. If you introduce a bill, you should be able to defend the bill.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm just saying that there's some bills I probably won't introduce because of that reason now.
Yeah.
And every bill you introduce isn't necessarily a bill that you might want passed so much as it might be a bill that's worth discussing. Is that the idea behind submitting a bill that you don't completely understand?
Yes, and I've submitted bills that from a request of a constituent before. That
include Brad Nolan, the firing range.
Brad Nolan, the firing range. You know what? I just fired off an email about that last week to find out where we're at. We're still moving forward, Brad.
We got progress. We got progress.
Unless they're blatantly lying to me, we are still moving forward, and we should probably start hearing something in the very near future, I think.
Any idea how that would work? The actual getting the property and having the firing range?
Oh, for the range? Oh, the property is already state-owned or sportsman-owned Sleepy Creek Wildlife Management Area. There was a site chosen up there. The process right now is putting it out for contractors to express their interest in it, and then choosing a contractor to move forward at that point.
Are there regulatory requirements you have to get over, Chuck?
Yes, and I'm not a good one to answer what they all are, but yeah, certainly there is, and I think there's some EPA stuff involved as well because of lead projectiles.
Yeah.
EPA as opposed to DEP, federal as opposed to state.
Yeah, federal, and generally the way that works is DEP usually has primacy on most issues. Basically, they're the enforcers, but they have to also enforce what the EPA regulations are.
Well, in sum, Chuck, how do you feel that this past session was? We've given it various marks, and we had it on one of the Friday morning talk shows, and admittedly, in total, it got fairly poor poor grades. Would you go along with that?
It felt like a strange session, more than just the new process, but just some of the legislation that was introduced. Some of the time spent on some pieces of legislation seemed quite immense. And I was disappointed with the results of some legislation, especially like the repeal of CON, which is something that the governor really wanted to get done. And
were you supportive of the repeal of CON?
Yes.
You mean as many times you and I have talked about on the show, you're still for the repeal?
Yes, I am.
You need help, Chuck.
You tried to help him, Bill.
Well, that might be your opinion. My opinion might be that the Admiral needs help.
I've been told that many a time.
He's got a point, Bill.
Not a good point, though, Rob.
It's a point. Chuck, I want to talk about the one bill you tried to get through, HJR 22, to increase the homestead exemption to $50,000. This would have been very important to Eastern Panhandle residents, especially elderly residents who maybe bought their homes a while ago, and the astronomical increase in home values has led to higher real estate taxes for these folks who are oftentimes on fixed incomes. Did that get anywhere? Any traction? Maybe next time it might make it through.
Did not get any traction that I was aware of. Now, I will say about a year ago, talking with some others, that it seemed like it was on leadership's radar to some degree. But with all the tax cuts that we've done recently, I think, and where we're at on revenue now, it's probably not a particularly big item at the moment, because it would really run us tight in the budget, I guess, is what would happen. It would really tighten the budget up considerably. And we're seeing that this year right now, where we're $237 million to the good, I think, so far.
Correct.
So we're going to finish at what, 350, maybe 400 million to the good would be my guess, which is substantially less than what we were doing before all the tax cuts that we've done. So I think we're seeing that play into the mix there, and I think we're seeing some growth too now, and I think we'll see some more growth next year as far as revenue goes, and I think we'll probably work our way through that $400 million possible deficit going forward that the governor was talking about.
Did you regard that as a real deficit, or was that more of a staged deficit to try to get some points through?
I don't want to say it was staged. I think it was looking forward at a potential problem. And I think part of that potential problem was because of the tax cuts that we've done, and we need that opportunity for the natural growth and actually some growth that's taking place in the state to happen, to bring our revenues back up. And I think we're going to see that next session, next year especially. This year we're looking like we're going to be okay. And this year, back when we done the tax cuts and all the discussion was about the tax cuts, we expected this year to be the tightest year. After this year, things should get a bit better as far as revenue goes.
You had some legislation, and you'll have to help me fill in the blanks on what it was called exactly here, but it had to do with entry upon private lands by law enforcement officers, DNR, and it was warrantless entry on those lands.
Warrantless search.
Warrantless search.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yes.
Well, how did that do? Where did it go?
Nothing really happened with that. I talked to Judiciary Chair, told him that was one of the bills I'd like to see run, and he seemed hesitant about it. He foresaw a lot of pushback from law enforcement, which certainly there's going to be pushback on that one. He did have interest in running a different bill, and that was the repeal and rewrite of civil asset forfeiture process and change it to criminal asset forfeiture process, to where before the state could keep property that was seized due to drug activity or criminal activity, that before the state could maintain ownership of said property, that there would have to be a criminal conviction. Whereas right now you don't have to get a criminal conviction. And those that are opposed to change, what they point out is they point out that you have due process now. And you sort of have a due process, but it's in civil court, which goes by the lowest possible standard of more likely than not. So in reality, what you have is you have a process where the state can take your assets or your property simply by convincing a judge more likely than not it was from proceeds or part of criminal activity. Whereas to convict you of a speeding ticket, they have to show beyond a reasonable doubt. So they can literally take your property, they can take $10,000 from you, simply more likely than not, and then to fine you for a speeding ticket, they have to show beyond a reasonable doubt.
There was a case like that a few years back in Jefferson County on, was it 349 area, where somebody was stopped, a motorist, they had cash in the car.
Yes.
The cash was seized, and I think there was a lawsuit that came from that. I don't recall the specifics of it. Maybe you do, but
yeah. I don't know the real specifics on that one there.
Mm-hmm.
It had to do with a couple from New Jersey that were gambling, I think,
Yes.
at a casino. They seized their money, never charged them with a crime. I believe that people got an attorney, and they did get their money back. However, anytime the state is taking money from somebody, they're depriving you of your ability to use your money, and it should be taken as a serious thing.
Not to mention the potential for an inaccurate count of the money seized versus the money returned.
And there was one here in Berkeley County that I've been looking at in 2022. A large amount of cash was taken from an individual that Chinese. He didn't speak English at all. Mm-hmm. And had to use a translator. I looked at the video from the traffic stop, and immediately the officer was aware that the individual couldn't communicate with him and was using an app on his telephone. So they used an app for him the officer to show him that, tell him that, pulled him over for speeding and needs his driver's license registration. And at that point, it looks like the officer observed a pretty good wad of cash when the gentleman got his wallet out. And it turned from a traffic stop, it seems, at that point, to some sort of a criminal investigation simply because he had cash money. And it proceeded to where they seized a lot of money from him. And the call had a canine come out. Canine alerted on the vehicle. No drugs were ever found. However, they still seized his cash. And detained him for a period of time, and then released him without his cash. And he had, as I understand, he had no means to support himself. He was refusing to leave the sheriff's department parking lot, and that escalated into taking him down and charging him with criminal trespass and obstruction of justice.
So there's a crime where there was no crime.
So there was a crime at that point, and it appears that then at that point the taxpayers footed the bill for an attorney to represent him on the criminal charges. Criminal charges were ultimately dismissed, and he ultimately got his money back at some point. There was an attorney involved in getting the money back, so I don't know what his actual costs were there. But to me, it's just a wrong situation when you just seize money and it costs somebody to get their money back or their property back. And never even charged with a crime, so to speak. He was never charged with a crime prior to the seizure, mm-hmm. And then he was charged with a crime that really had nothing to do with the seizure.
Right. Yeah.
A couple of things wrong with this. One, the fact that it happened is wrong, but the fact it was not really reported, did it make the news at all?
I do not recall that being in the news.
And it should have been. Somebody
made me aware of that one. And I FOIA'd some information on that and got the body cam footage and everything from that case.
Because this is, if it's true the way that you've laid it out, and I have no reason to think that it's not true, that's a real blight on the way that we conduct our law enforcement. And I don't think that's typical. I think our law enforcement are generally very, very correct in what they do. But,
And I agree with you. And here's one thing: it's really bad for the citizens that may happen to. But you know who it's really worse for? It's really worse for law enforcement.
That's my point. Yeah.
Yeah, because what happens is they lose the trust of the people in the community, and then when that happens, then they get disrespected. Nobody respects them. Nobody cares for them, and it's just a downhill struggle after that. Yeah. And I think a rewrite of our process to require a criminal conviction, it won't stop the seizure per se, but the state or the department can never maintain title to the assets until they get a criminal conviction or a plea agreement.
Chuck, this was an interesting one. I know we had talked about this previously, to remove qualified immunity from officers serving no-knock warrants, because I know that you were dealing with legislation before on no-knock warrants too. Can you get into the removal of qualified immunity on those?
Okay, what I came up with, and correct, you're correct. I was looking at no-knock warrants because I just think that they're generally a very bad situation, and I was wondering, what can we do to protect the citizens of West Virginia against such procedures while still allowing the possibility of it to be used when necessary. And I looked at other states, and states that had they actually banned no-knock warrants where they're not allowed to. And as I come to find out, West Virginia does have law that requires knock and announce. So we do have a requirement, but what you effectively get is you can have a warrant that's served at 3 a.m. in the morning when everybody's sleeping, and you get a bang, bang, bang on the door, holler police, and then crash the door in. So effectively, you still have a no-knock warrant. Well, technically, it's not. Generally, somebody in a sound sleep may just wake up when the door gets crashed and never hear the knock or the announcement, and it just creates a very dangerous situation, especially when it's used in situations where it's probably not necessarily a dangerous situation. I'll give you an example. A fairly recent one was in Kentucky. A judge had some property stolen by somebody. Weed whacker was one of the things stolen, and they caught the guy that committed the theft. They had him, and he told them who he gave the weed whacker to. Now, this is weed whacker belonged to a judge. So I suspect that they wanted to make an example out of whoever was involved in this. So they went to what they believed was the address of the individual that had the weed whacker. What law enforcement decided was the address, or came up with the address, going by what the individual told them. And they go there at 3 a.m. in the morning, and they knock and announce and bash the door in. They make entry. The individual has a gun at that point, and they shoot and they kill him. And it turns out they have the wrong house, totally innocent person, not involved in it whatsoever, who is now dead because of a so-called no-knock or announce and bash warrant.
Yeah. And you didn't get anywhere with that legislation yet?
No, just introduced. I mean, there's a lot of folks that believe it's on the right track there. I can assure you that law enforcement and what have you probably don't believe it's on the right track. But again, it still comes down to the same thing like with the civil asset forfeiture. It's protecting the citizens while trying to maintain some sort of tools for law enforcement to use.
Now, Bill?
I had a situation, a good friend of mine, same situation you described. Wrong house, police came in. In this case, it was, I guess, robbers came in and shot him and did not kill him, but it mentally impaired him for the rest of his life. So.
And that's another thing with these type of warrants. The knock and announce and bash the door in. Bad guys have been known to use that now for raids on homes. Pretend like they're the police, they knock and they announce that they're police and bash the door in, and it turns out they're just simple thieves. And the other thing about and what my bill done was simply removing qualified immunity in that type of a warrant, because that would ensure that when I believe that would ensure that when a law enforcement agency would want to use that type of warrant, that they will make sure they dot all their I's and cross all their T's and make sure all the information is correct before taking the chance of having a mistake made.
Chuck, we're about to run out of time, but going back to the past session, it was my impression, correct me if I'm wrong on this, please, my impression there was more friction, less cooperation between the House and the Senate than what we normally would expect. Is that a fair assessment?
Perhaps to some degree, maybe, but the one thing I would say is you really saw a flip with the last election. The Senate got, I think, much more conservative, and the House maybe not quite as conservative. And I think that created a considerable amount of friction that you're talking about.
I would phrase it a different way, and again, correct me. I got the impression the Senate was more driven toward cultural issues, and the House was more the economic issues.
There might be some truth to that. I mean, certainly cultural issues were looked like a high priority on the Senate side, and with a fair number of members of the House as well. I don't know, I want to say actually a majority in the House, but a fair number.
Yeah, sure.
Now, Bill, lest you think that there's no saving your buddy Chuck here when it comes to certificate of need, I did see on your list of bills, Chuck, you did submit one for an exemption of CON for neighborhood hospitals.
Yes.
So, see, Bill, there's hope.
Hospitals or hospice?
Hospitals. So what that was, and there was another bill, I think Clark had introduced one for micro hospitals, his was called, basically for a very small footprint type hospital with a limited number of beds. Sure. That way it really doesn't encroach on your existing hospital, but does give you some of that added or needed health care option.
So I should kind of back off on my criticism of Chuck, should I, Rob?
Well, where there's a exemption for one, he may be influenceable for an exemption for another. That's what I'm saying, Bill.
You're not a bad guy, Chuck.
And I do want to be clear that I was okay with an exemption for the hospice on CON.
I knew you were. I remember we've had this discussion before, so I was just pulling your chain.
Chuck, good to see you again. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yep, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chuck. Always fun.
Delegate Chuck Horst out of the 95th, Vice Chair of Revenue. And